Hey everybody, welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where yesterday we finished a beautiful book, Derech Hashem, by the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. Excellent book, one of the quintessential handbooks of Jewish thought for sure. But I thought maybe today, since we finished that book, we'd change it up with something a little more modern. So I selected the book The Soul by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. And if you're not familiar with Rabbi Steinsaltz, he is really a modern-day Torah giant, renowned for writing the Steinsaltz Talmud, which he finished in the 60s and has been translated into many different languages. The Steinsaltz edition of the Talmud. More than that, about 20 years ago, when Israel tried to renew the Sanhedrin, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz was the elected high priest, the Nasi. In 2004, he accepted the honor and stepped down out of it in 2008. And this is one of his last works. He finished this book in 2018, and of blessed memory, he went home to be with Hashem in 2020. Pneumonia, or probably COVID-related. Who knows? I don't know exactly, but this is one of his last works. But he did have a stroke in 2016, and no doubt a great scholar of his renown, probably felt trapped within his body and had a lot of time to meditate, and then came out with this book in 2018 on the soul. And it's new to me, so I'm hoping you will enjoy it as much as I will. So let's dive right in and get into The Soul by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. Okay, so we'll start with the foreword. Have you encountered your soul yet? Are you paying attention to your soul? When a secular entrepreneur has the rare opportunity to have a close encounter with a giant Talmudic scholar, a Torah master, and an evolved soul seeker of the stature of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, a new dimension opens. No magical lights, no sounds, no fireworks, no epiphany, no revelations, and at first, no conscious transformation, but a door to the infinite opens from the subtle, soft voice transcending all physical dimensions, from above to below, as one experiences a soul-to-soul encounter. Very interesting. Now, this is a short work, so we should be able to finish this in 4 or 5 sessions. For some reason, unbeknownst to me, it was my destiny to meet and get to know Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. In one of our many meetings, I saw that Rabbi Steinsaltz was tired from his work, and there was still a room full of people waiting to meet with him. I asked him, Rabbi, you have so many things to do, lectures to give, books to write. Why do you spend the time talking to me? He looked at me with his deep, penetrating blue eyes and profoundly said, because you listen. The rabbi explains that people run around a lot, not in order to get any particular place, but mainly to escape from themselves. But in fact, a person should pay attention to the anguish of his soul, however it manifests itself. I feel privileged to have had the opportunity to work on and discuss the soul with Rabbi Steinsaltz. If we want to evolve as human beings, we need to assume the responsibility of acknowledging our soul, to distinguish our actions from reactions and behave accordingly. Listen to your soul. That's by Alberto Pisak. Part 1. About the soul. It is unclear how early in life we discover that we have a soul. Nevertheless, the soul is one of the first things we do perceive, even if we don't perceive it fully. This is similar to our perception of our bodies, which also develops in stages. As children, we probably discover our stomachs because there was sometimes pain there, for example. Then, through the senses of sight and touch, we gradually discover our hands, feet, and other parts until we came to full awareness of our bodies. As adults, we conduct a constant, loving dialogue with the body, possibly too loving, and are always dealing with it and caring for it to some degree. Nevertheless, more of it is hidden from us than perceived by us. While we are able to see and touch the external parts of our bodies, we are not so intimately acquainted with our internal organs and systems whose workings are hidden. Likewise, the experience of the soul does not enter our consciousness as a complete unified perception. It penetrates our consciousness as an accumulation of experiences: love and hate, attraction and abhorrence, curiosity and learning, and so on. These experiences appear individually. Only at a later stage do they accumulate and form some sense of self. When the totality of these experiences is finally perceived by us as the self, even an unsophisticated person can differentiate between self in the physical sense and self in the spiritual sense, which is a part of the soul. Our acquaintance with the soul is fundamental, and we are aware of it long before we can give it a name. However, just as our acquaintance with our bodies begins with externally focused perceptions, our acquaintance with our souls also begins with externally focused experiences, while its inner workings are far less apparent. The soul is something we sense. We are as certain of its existence as we are of the body's existence, but we don't know much about it. Throughout the ages, attempts have been made to define the soul, not only to define it, but also to locate it. The Greeks thought the locus of the soul was the diaphragm. By contrast, the Torah states that the blood is the soul in Deuteronomy 12:23. This perception is perhaps related to the idea that the heart is the basis of physical existence as well as the focal point of the soul. All of these efforts are attempts to resolve the enigma of the soul by locating it somewhere in the body. After many generations of observation, it is generally accepted that the soul is located in the brain. However, scientists and philosophers, as well as other thinking people, know that this sort of definition is merely convenient, shorthand, and not really a description. Even those who locate the soul in the heart or brain know that these organs are pieces of flesh. They are, at best, points of contact with the soul, but do not constitute the soul itself. While there is an essential perception of self within the soul, this perception has no content. It is merely a declaration. In other words, our acquaintance with our souls is essentially no different from our acquaintance with other people. Interesting thought. We might know what clothes they wear, what they look like, or even their way of thinking. Nevertheless, they are still foreign to us. They are familiar to us only through their extrinsic features, not their inner content. A person's mind contains millions of details, most of which are unknown to anyone else and are unlikely to ever become known to anyone else. But the awareness of self is beyond these details. I know, I think, I feel, and even I am alive are manifestations of self-awareness, but they cannot bring us closer to real familiarity with our souls. Some people are inclined to contemplate the essence of their souls. Others can live their entire lives, even lives of intellectual activity, without taking an interest in their souls at all. These different attitudes are influenced by personality, certainly, but also by our inner world of experiences. Hi, Paul. Those whose lives are externally centered do not give their own souls much thought. The more we are aware of inner experiences, such as love and hate, hope and despair, the greater the chance that these experiences will awaken some sort of awareness of the full depth and breadth of our souls. But even people who are self-aware, who spend at least some time thinking about their souls, do not usually reach beyond the scope of their existing experiences. So while every person has a soul, the soul eludes definition. The Maharal puts it this way: in one way or another, we all sense our soul and know that it exists, yet we do not know what it really is. It is specifically those who spend time exploring the soul who understand that although they are familiar with the layers and parts of the soul, and even with its functions, they are still unable to perceive its essence. They are aware that they are dealing with superficial manifestations of its existence and not with its ultimate nature. It has been said of God that he is the closest being and yet the most distant being, so too the soul. These and other mysteries that dwell beyond intellectual consciousness have been revealed to only a few individuals over the course of time. These few are the ones who can speak of the essence of the soul. The content of this book draws on the illumination of and is written in the spirit of those true masters of the soul, certain great sages who were aware of their divine souls and were intimately connected with them. Having been party to such knowledge, they have conveyed some of its mysteries and have revealed parts of its essence to us. Interesting. And he quotes some of the, he quotes the Maharal of Prague and the Rabbi Ibn Pakuda, some of the things that some of the authors we've read before, some of the great sages. So what is the soul? We have seen that it is impossible to pin down the soul, yet if we wish to speak about it, we need a common understanding of what we are talking about. The language, though imperfect, is the only tool available to us for this purpose. What vocabulary or terminology we choose is certain to create a particular image of the soul. Such an image can be useful in moving us ever closer to some understanding of the soul, but it is only an image. Thus, in the chapters ahead, we will not confine ourselves to a single image. To do so would imply that the soul actually can be confined in this way, or confined at all. Instead, we may use different language in different contexts, which will conjure different imagery in different chapters, or sometimes in the same chapter. To begin, then, the soul is, of course, immaterial, and it is only beyond matter, but it is not only beyond matter, but also beyond what is considered spirit. That is, it is beyond whatever the intellect, at its highest, can reach and understand or make clear to itself. The soul is thus not to be conceived as a certain defined entity caged in the body or occupying finite space. Instead, it should be thought of as a continuous line of spiritual being stretching from the primary source of all the souls to beyond the specific body of a particular person. Wow, what a statement for a definition. When we speak of the primary source, the foundation of that ineffable presence that is the soul, we can say that all souls emanate from a single point. All souls are like reflections of one source of light on different objects. While each soul is a singularity unto itself, the light of the primary source exists within it. 2. We could say, then, that all souls come from the same source. All souls have the same value, and all souls exist on the same level. However, when souls descend into the world from this primordial source, and even more so when they become manifest in the reality of our world, in other words, when they come to dwell in human bodies, they are no longer equal. What is more, no two souls are identical. Every soul is unique. Each soul has its own essence and character that is different from those of any other soul. This is why we need to respect that breath of life in the Sheva Mitzvot. The soul, then, in relation to the entirety of the life, is like the vital force that animates everything in existence. This energy is not something we may take or leave. It is an inner reality. It is what germinates the seed of the fruit and causes the tree to grow. It lies at the foundation of every living being. According to Jewish mystical literature, there are several levels of the soul, and they are parallel to levels in the spiritual universe in general. In the language of Kabbalah, the Nefesh level corresponds to our world, which is called the world of action. The Ruach level corresponds to the world of formation, and the neshama level corresponds to the world of creation. Because these worlds, despite their differences, are in a certain sense a single unit, the levels nefesh, ruach, and neshama, although distinct, are located on a single continuum. What a definition. Wow. The higher level of the soul, the Haya level, essentially corresponds to the world of Absolute, or proximity to God, which is not exactly a world, but a type of divine revelation. And we had some of that shared by the Ramkel. Therefore, people seldom discover this level, and when they do, it is only thanks to tremendous efforts on their part, which enables them to ascend and reach some sort of connection with the divine revelation. The highest level, the level of Yechida, is beyond even the world of Absolute, and in a certain sense, it is not part of the soul of a specific individual, but is included in the primary of all sources. Yes, that's when you have true connection with Hashem, you're kind of negated. This is why it is called Yechida, singular, as it is the single general soul that is shared by all. Throughout the generations, there have only been a few individuals called Masters of the High, an acronym for Hayach Yechida, who achieved enlightenment on the level of Haya Yechida, essentially setting themselves apart from other human beings. It is possible for human beings to ascend from one level to a higher one, but it is a task involving great exertion. In fact, I got to keep these notes for sure. In fact, our spiritual personas can be likened to a multi-story building where the first, lower floor in the building is the nefesh level. Above it is the ruach level, and above that is the neshama level. Above that is the lofty level of the soul called haya. And above this is the ultimate level called yechida. All of these levels exist within everyone. However, some of them are accessed only by certain individuals. A really good explanation, very clear modern English for sure. Most of us dwell on the ground floor of this multi-story building, the nefesh level, and do not necessarily occupy that floor fully. We start to ascend when our awareness of our inner selves does not remain at the first level, but starts to rise. While success in making this ascension is due in some measure to the grace of God or our God-given gifts, it depends first and foremost on our own conscious decision to attempt to climb. This is where Jacob's ladder comes into understanding the ascending and descending. But even if most people choose to remain on the ground floor, and there are those who actually prefer the basement, the entire building is open to anyone who makes the effort. For our purposes here, we are interested in two levels of the soul, the nefesh, the vital soul, and the neshama, the godly soul. At the most basic level, everything in the animal and mineral world has a nefesh. For human beings, as we have seen, the nefesh is the lowest level of our non-material existence, thoughts, feelings, etc., and we are in constant contact with it. But unlike the nefesh, which includes many components related to both the physical and the spiritual sides of life, the main characteristic of a neshama, a soul, any soul, is that it is a spark of God. This is why the entirety of the soul's existence is impelled towards its creator. From another perspective, we can say that the difference between the nefesh and the neshama lies in their foundations and their basic inclinations. The nefesh is the self, the more conscious part of our inner being, and it works within every person to fulfill the needs and desires of the self, whether they are physical and instinctive or abstract and spiritual. More about the self in the next chapter. The neshama, on the other hand, is not driven by the self, but exists beyond the self. It has no physical anchor. It is spiritual and abstract. It is not directly involved with the human body. It is involved with sanctity and with the human relationship with God. It connects with the human self through the nephesh. It follows that, in a certain sense, these two components of the soul, the nephesh and the neshama, are one, or at least located on the same continuum. But in another sense, they are distinct. For this reason, human beings hold within them an inherent duality, two souls that act as one, but on two different paths. At times, the fundamental difference between the impulses of these two parts of the soul lead them into conflict. What's more, the interaction between them is constantly influencing our thoughts, speech, and actions. Yeah, the three real primary things that man does: thought, speech, and action. And since these two souls act as one more often than not, we do not always perceive them as distinct from one another. Therefore, we do not know the source of every thought or urge we have. Sometimes they're fleeting thoughts, they just come to us. Indeed, a large part of our spiritual development is learning to distinguish these different components. The vital soul and the godly soul, and hearing how each addresses us individually and how they address us as one. The manifest soul. All right. Hopefully you're enjoying it. I think this is beautifully written for sure. Definitely more modern. So far, we have discussed the nature of the soul, how we tend to conceptualize it, and the images we use to speak about it. We have also looked into that strange part of our soul called the self. But how do you know your own soul? How do you recognize it, interact with it? Can you call it forth, or does it call you forth? Let's take a closer look. Whether, when, and how a soul manifests itself depends on a few things. Education and cultural environment are chief among them. Education is not just transferring information or training children to behave in a certain way. It also involves transmitting customs and traditions, rules, and more, consciously or unconsciously. This is true in every society, past and present. In some societies, education is well-defined and stable, and it may include spiritual elements if the society wishes to emphasize those. In others, not. Belief in God can be a personal matter, or it can be common to an entire society. It can be expressed in a private way, or it can be expressed within an organized, ceremonial, ritual structure. In all cases, it takes form according to the nature of the cultural environment. Here, as well as elsewhere, the influence of education at home or in an educational institution is either weakened or strengthened by the environment. And this is why we held this Noahide input, Noahide path with Rabbi Moshe Shulman, trying to work with those people that have come out of the Christian paradigm, because it is in fact a paradigm that weakens or strengthens a person's approach to true Torah and Tanakh. And Rabbi Moshe Shulman's tried to make clear that there is a distinct paradigm shift, and a lot of things have to be dropped off, yet people only function with the baggage they carry. I think this breaks it down a little bit too. A supportive cultural environment will reinforce basic education, while a non-supportive or hostile society will weaken the education's effect or even erase it completely. At times during the course of history, spiritual and religious matters were emphasized and encouraged in homes and in religious and educational institutions everywhere. In such an environment, an individual's soul would be likely to manifest and flourish. By contrast, during periods of history when religion or spirituality were out of fashion, just the opposite would be likely. Individual souls would not be so inclined to manifest or flourish. The same was and continues to be true on a local level. if we were to examine a particular geographic area at any particular time in history, we would probably find the same phenomenon. Some cities or towns or neighborhoods would encourage, through cultural and education, the development of the soul. In such circumstances, people would likely discover their souls at a young age and perceive them in a clear way. Other cities, towns, or neighborhoods in the same area would fail to even acknowledge the soul with an equally predictable outcome. There are a few wild cards in this formula, however, and one of them is heredity. Yeah, well, I think I've read recently how dispositions are passed on hereditarily, and this is why the Torah says that the sins of the fathers visit the children to the third and fourth generation. And that's the way predispositions, affect, and that environment plays into it, but it's definitely not automatic. Free will still has the ability to outgrow predispositions or use the intellect to develop. There are various capabilities that are part of our genetic makeup, but not all of them emerge organically. Some require education and cultivation to be brought to fruition. This reality can be likened to various capabilities that most people possess, but that become apparent only under suitable conditions. For example, most people have the ability to learn how to read and write. Experience shows that this capability exists even among people who were raised in cultures that never developed an alphabet, and consequently never had the chance to express the ability to read and write. However, a child from such a culture who is placed in a school will learn how to read and write in exactly the same way that a child born into a culture possessing an alphabet will learn. Another departure from the rule involves those unusual people who succeed in expressing their abilities even in surroundings completely lacking the necessary framework for doing so. The souls of such exceptional people will be illuminated within them so clearly that they are compelled to discover them, even in the absence of the appropriate environmental conditions. The second important influence on how the soul manifests is the level of the soul itself. A high soul is also a clear, strong soul, and whoever has such a soul is more strongly aware of it than someone whose soul is small or low. The distinction between a great or high soul and a small or low soul does not have to do with talent, and certainly not with actions. That's a unique statement. The level of the soul is simply a trait that exists within each of us. There are people whose great souls will be revealed in everything they do, in their breadth of vision, in the loftiness of their desires, in their ability to perceive hidden spiritual heights. At root, the difference between high and low souls is the difference between those whose souls are based on expansive vision and lofty goals, and those whose desires and horizons are narrowed and confined. These differences are unrelated to anything that can be explained in terms of material existence. God distributes souls in a manner that seems arbitrary to us. Although we do not choose our souls or the way they reveal themselves, all of us are capable of discovering more noble elements within ourselves. Very, very, very big point. There is inner work to be done. However, and this is important, we must access the higher levels of our soul and cause them to manifest within our active consciousness. All of the levels of the soul exist within every person. By accessing the higher levels, we are able to liberate ourselves from the assumptions of a particular culture or the assumptions of the point in history we happen to be living in. That's hopeful. The vehicle through which our souls are manifest is usually an epiphany of some kind, beyond time, place, culture, or level of the soul. An epiphany can be thought of as a sudden insight of great importance that seems to come out of the blue. But not all epiphanies are the same. They differ in nature and affect from person to person. They can also differ within the lifetime of a single person. For instance, most of us achieve some awareness, even if faint, of the existence of our souls. This awareness usually arrives through the simple recognition that beyond the self, there is something deep within us that we cannot name. For most people who experience them, epiphanies of the soul apparently intermittently, whether for a short time or a longer period, and then vanish. These spontaneous bursts of light that some experience cause a sense of spiritual elevation. They do not always involve a feeling of happiness, but they always involve a clarity of vision. We can compare it to the feeling you might have if you stand for a moment at the summit of a mountain, momentarily seeing, breathing, and even feeling differently, perhaps experiencing a sense of liberation. Another kind of epiphany can be described as just a stirring experience that fills us with a sense of enlightenment and happiness, or an epiphany that may have a more extreme effect in which the soul's inner light illuminates not only the mind and heart, but produces a heightened sense of experience and consciousness. These epiphanies do not usually occur as the result of certain action or a specific type of meditation. We experience them as completely spontaneous phenomena that appear, linger for a while, and then fade and suddenly as they disappear. On the other hand, there are people, probably a minority, to whom the soul reveals itself frequently, consistently, and recognizably. The epiphany of the soul for such individuals is almost like a heartbeat. It accompanies them daily and through every situation, and it has a certain basic permanency. In this type of epiphany, there are normally no exceptional climatic experiences or unusual visions, but simply the general state of being illuminated with inner light which even others may notice. In addition to this range of ephemeral epiphanies, it is possible that on any ordinary day or in the face of a significant, even tragic incident, you may experience an epiphany and through it discover your soul. This would be a dramatic, possibly even terrifying event with no explanation, rationale, or otherwise for what occurred, just the feeling that your soul is within you. Through such experiences, which can happen to anyone, you do not discover great mysteries or sudden revelations. Rather, the familiarity is suddenly seen in a new light through different eyes. An epiphany of the soul can be terrifying because it brings about a new and different perspective on all reality, on all of life, and it gives rise to the question, what do I do now? Or, what have I been doing for the last 20 years? This is reminiscent of the question God asked Adam after the sin in the Garden of Eden. Where are you? Big question. Where are you? Not that Hashem didn't know. The point is, where are you in relation to your development? He was placed into the garden to tend it and to keep it. And where are you now? Yeah, in relation to that purpose. When you hear this voice speaking to you, you may arrive at a disheartening conclusion about the value of your life. The activity of your soul should cause you to rise upward, sensing sanctity, engaging in pursuits whose value is measured in terms other than money and prestige. An epiphany can lead you to ask yourself not only whether you are a sinner or a righteous person, whether you fulfilled your duty or not, but simply to echo God's call to Adam, where are you? This pithy and elusive question is really asking whether we have achieved what we could have achieved spiritually in our lives. The precise nature of the impact of an epiphany may have on you depends on the awareness it brings about in your life. At times, one flash may be enough to shock you into an immediate response. This can feel like walking in the dark when a sudden flash of lightning reveals that you are standing at the edge of an abyss. In this kind of situation, a deep and sustained epiphany is unnecessary. You now realize where you stand, and that is sufficient motivation to pull yourself away from there. For instance, there could be an issue in your life that was never of interest, but now suddenly it can no longer be ignored. You are at the edge of an abyss at the point of no return. The epiphany doesn't reveal anything new. Instead, it provides the discovery of an entirely different way of thinking, a realm of the soul that is located on the other side of reality. This shift can also occur in a different way. Instead of the edge of an abyss, you could be making your way through heavy fog. You can discern only blurred figures and images. When suddenly a light appears in the depth of the fog, the light does not change reality, but merely provides a new dimension to everything. Objects that had seemed whole now look like parts of a larger structures. What had been perceived as walls and partitions now look like entrances and corridors leading to other places. The opposite can also be true. Something that used to seem clear and alluring suddenly looks less clear. You might discover, for example, that the path you thought was the only one is really but one of several possible paths, and what had seemed like the highway is actually only a side street. Such epiphanies, which were actually not so rare, are not necessarily connected with any sort of divine guidance. Rather, they simply offer an entirely different perspective on your whole life. They may continue to provide significant memories throughout your life. Hold on, I'm just checking Facebook. They may continue to provide significant memories throughout your life and enable you to reach for a higher spiritual experience, which serves continuously as a point of comparison. For many, these epiphanies of the soul are like glimmers of light. They may appear at frequent intervals or even daily, but they do not always have the power to constitute an ongoing, continuous, or a redemptive experience. They merely accompany us as tiny points of recognition that reality is not limited to the familiar. This is referred to as fleeting thoughts of repentance, which may, in many cases, do not lead us to a different path, but rather reveal the possibility of living differently. Whether they occur frequently or rarely, we all attain certain epiphanies in our souls. As their frequency and intensity differ among us, so does their effect. Some of us may be capable of grasping these epiphanies and elevating their entire lives to a new level, and others may arrive at only one hazy recognition that there is another kind of existence that remains largely concealed. Our sages, who occupied themselves with these aspects of the soul's life, advise us to create spiritual vessels to contain them. When we think about creating spiritual vessels, we can imagine people lost at sea who are hoping to reach a safe haven but who do not have drinking water. If it begins to rain, the initial reaction of these thirsty people will be to open their mouths, cup their hands together, and to drink as much of the rainwater as they can. However, the rain will end sooner or later, and only those who found vessels to contain the life-giving water will be able to continue to use it for the duration of their voyage. Big point. Although such vessels cannot really contain the experience, they nevertheless contribute to spiritual growth in a number of significant ways. Spiritual vessels for containing the light of an epiphany could be, for example, a decision to make some change in your way of life, or a far less dramatic decision, say, to begin a certain course of study or to perform certain works. Such a decision made during one good moment in your life and causing you to continue acting upon it even after that experience has faded remains significant for the rest of your life. It preserves a part of the original experience, preventing it from completely fading away. In this way, you guide yourself to a different place, a different world. Now, death unravels the connection between the soul and the body, but as long as we are alive, our souls never leave us completely. No matter our character, personality, or deeds, it is impossible for us to reach a state of decline or corruption so profound that we would actually lose our soul. This is because the soul is the foundation of our lives in a far deeper sense than it is the manifest self. The highly complex structure of body, soul, self is a synchronized system, and when a certain component upsets the equilibrium, it creates turbulence in the entire system. The classic example of this disruption of equilibrium is prophecy. Testimonies from the period when prophecy occurred demonstrate that neither the soul nor the body was able to contain the prophetic revelation. The Bible describes the prophets falling down or completely losing touch with the outside world. The verse, "The prophet is a fool, the man of spirit is mad," from Hosea 9:7, reflects the fact that even if a prophet is level-headed, socially involved person, in all other respects a person whose life is in order, when he is under the influence of a prophetic revelation, he becomes an aberration. Prophecy also agitates the nephesh, since it has been inundated with more than it is accustomed to containing, causing the prophet to exhibit signs of madness. Yeah, that's the nature of heavenly revelation. It overloads for sure. And we have to be able to decipher. This phenomenon, so prominent among the prophets, can also manifest themselves in others, at times even in ordinary people who experience some kind of epiphany, whether as a result of a conscious, consistent search or a flash of light from above, when there is a correlation between the epiphany and the basic spiritual personality of the recipient, that is, the recipient is already given to spiritual reflection. Then the experience is positive. But when there is no such correlation, the experience is traumatic for the soul and perhaps for the body as well. The trauma can create a temporary or permanent fracture in a person's life. Such a fracture is not a punishment. It is instead a matter of receiving a gift that is beyond the person's capacity to contain. This can be compared to winning the jackpot in a large lottery. At times, it solves the winner's problems, providing a different life path, but in other cases, particularly because it is not the result of a specific divine extended effort, it can cause an existential crisis. Consequently, when our souls are revealed to us through an epiphany, we should pray for the strength to contain it. Even when we ask for something, we must be ready to accept it. And how often do people not realize the weight of what they ask for? Part 2. The soul and us. As long as we are alive, our soul is within us at all times. But our attitude towards the soul varies, depending on who we are and the times in which we live. When we are busy with our routine of work, studies, or domestic life, even tangible phenomena such as our breathing and our heartbeat are not always part of our conscious awareness. This is all the more true for the soul, which is largely intangible and toward which we have a complex and equivocal attitude. What's more, it dwells in the hard-to-reach margins of our consciousness, unless remarkable events bring it to the fore. Our way of life, as well as our specific life paths, all influence our attitude towards the soul. For example, someone who lived 1,000 years ago encountered incomparably fewer events, changes, and stimuli than almost every person experiences today. All of this takes both time and attention and does not leave room for many internally focused thoughts. Consequently, while our external reality grows more extensive, more fast-paced, and more demanding, our internal reality is constantly shrinking. And we see that today with people who have an overdose of stimuli. Moreover, a certain aspect of modern life is intentionally structured in a way that prevents people from facing themselves. Yeah, it's like today with people in their phones, they get so preoccupied they don't realize they're being rude. While people may have more free time, there is a vast and successful industry whose purpose is actually to devour free time. The recreation and entertainment industries are all meant to achieve that goal, to leave us not a tiny space free of pressure, tension, or temptation. These tensions surface in the form of worries and concerns, unpleasant experiences, and desires. Many of the stresses coming at us from every direction are spiritual, so the greatest desire of many of us is to find inner peace. In the past, when the events in people's lives were far more limited, they might have longed for excitement and emotional experiences. But today, longings tend to run the opposite direction: more peace of mind and less stress. It is not surprising that so many pursue pastimes whose main purpose is to calm them down. Even in days of old, the psalmist prayed, "Return my soul to restfulness," from Psalm 116:7. But the soul itself never rests. It is constantly creating and responding both to action and to inaction. And the soul always follows its own course, even when it is not manifest consciously in our thoughts or emotions. Even when we are unaware of what is happening in our soul, the soul tries to make its wishes known and to respond on its own terms to what we are doing and feeling. No matter what lifestyle, activities, or conscious thoughts we may have, and no matter what their source, at times the soul within us tries to get our attention and to respond to what is happening in our day-to-day experiences by shouting, "No, no," or "Yes, this is what you should be doing." If you're honest with yourself, yeah, it's so true. Often the visible reality conceals these utterances of the soul, but they are never completely silenced. Sometimes the soul's message accumulate within us, not only creating reversals in our thinking, but even taking on tangible expressions in our lives. Perfectly clear and fully formed epiphanies of the soul are a vanishing, rare event in general, but they occur fairly frequently in many people in variety of partial forms. At times, an epiphany will cause us to reject a certain way of life or veer away from it. Yeah, people are not as rational as they think. We have what's called bounded rationality, and so sometimes we make suboptimal decisions, simply just okay decisions. Had we had more information, maybe we'd made a better decision, but that comes down to acceptable rather than optimal. Other epiphanies may manifest as strong critiques of our lives. Some people are haunted like that. And at other times, an epiphany may present itself in the form of a question. Are there things that occupy me really worth the effort I am investing in them? See, thoughts which our sages refer to as fleeting thoughts of repentance can show up every day, and they may cause great upheaval in our professional or personal lives. Yeah, it's identifying, living within your own skin for sure. Perhaps someone who was a stockbroker decides to leave her job and family and become a painter because her soul won't allow her to remain in a certain area of life while she aspires to more spiritual existence. Existential crisis for sure. Since these epiphanies are not always sufficiently clear in our conscious understanding, even when they do cause us to make practical and conceptual changes, the changes may manifest themselves as half-baked ideas. The same unconscious message of the soul can sometimes trigger fears that have no visible cause, but they shake us to the core, even lead us to despondency and depression. Yeah, ideas of things that may and most likely will never happen. Fear. Frequently, depression, which is common these days, as evidenced by the huge number of people taking antidepressants or seeking psychiatric treatment, is not necessarily the result of a miserable existence. Instead, it can be part of a relatively peaceful existence in which the soul is trying to say something but isn't getting through. It is rare to find people who exemplify the statement, "A person's soul will teach him." People whose souls guide them towards a certain path, or grant them certain insights. In order that a person's soul will teach him, we must have an open, conscious dialogue with our soul. When such a dialogue is absent, we are left with fragments that do not provide solutions, but raise questions. The fact that our soul feels a little opaque to us should come as no surprise, since the same situation can even exist with completely material matters. We are aware of most of our visible body parts, but are less aware of our kidneys and livers and other organs that are hidden inside of our bodies. We often become aware of the soul in the same way we become aware of our body's inner organs, when we suffer an illness or experience pain in one of them. Indeed, there is no straightforward way that the search for and contemplation of our soul becomes apparent on a conscious level. When carrying out the search for our souls, we need to be conscious that our dreams and aspirations, even though these are essentially non-material, do not necessarily have anything to do with the soul. Family, education, and various cultural resources such as books, theater, and so on are also at work within us and may appear in our thoughts. Therefore, the emergence of new dreams or a longing for something new may not necessarily be spiritual in origin. While it is possible to search within ourselves and find things that are not part of our ordinary reality, many of these are mere reflections of external realities or illusions that lodge themselves within us and are not part of the soul in any fundamental way. It is possible, therefore, that one who modifies his way of life in some manner as a result of such input is merely realizing an extraneous dream, formed from thoughts and images that came to him from the outside and not from the soul. Indeed, people frequently go off on an adventure in a distant place or break up their families while in reality they are pursuing an illusion. Even in cases in which the matters at stake are real, these modifications are not always appropriate for the particular individual who is pursuing them. Therefore, even when we isolate ourselves to try to search within ourselves, we should take care not to confuse true, authentic reality with something that was transplanted from an outside source. Yeah, this is the way over being overly inundated with stimuli superimposes notions into your being, and you think it comes from within when in reality it's a superimposed notion from outside. And I love how true Judaism would have you flush all the previous experiences, try to be a blank canvas so Hashem can rebuild the legitimate character and integrity, taking you to your potential. Often the soul or the message it relays reaches us not as an epiphany, but as a disturbance. Our inner reality is exposed when normal, natural consciousness is disrupted or deviates from its path, perhaps for no obvious reason. For instance, a new planet... Forgive me, I'm fighting a sneeze here, folks. Okay. For instance, a new planet can be discovered as the result of a deviation in the orbit of another planet, another known planet. Likewise, the unusual and the incomprehensible within may lead us to search more carefully for something that exists but is concealed. Every fluctuation in our lives calls upon us to search for its source, sometimes enabling us to discover that what had been bothering us were not emotional problems, but various aspirations that were transplanted within us from elsewhere. As we have seen, it is not easy to discover the soul within us, but of the various kinds of background noise that conceal it from us. Only after these noises from the past or present are set aside can we reach a point where we will be able to withstand the ultimate test, the test of truth. Very important. And you know what? I think because this book is so short, yeah, we're already 22% finished. Yeah, so I think I will stop it at that point, and we will come back tomorrow on and explain the soul in God. But I hope you find this a much more modern work and a useful work from a true Talmud Chacham for sure. Rabbi Steinsaltz was a giant of this generation for sure, and I think the way it's written, you can tell, is very eloquent by somebody who's done a lot of writing in his life, and it's definitely clear modern English for sure, and the topic for sure, the soul is something that is we all could learn from, and I think to hear it from such a giant as Rabbi Steinsaltz, it's useful. So I think, we'll leave this at this, because I've got lots on my plate to do today, and hopefully you're enjoying this, and we will be back tomorrow and continue with more in the book The Soul by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. So hopefully you're enjoying it. If you got any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the chat room. And we'll be back tomorrow with more Rocky Mountain readings. Till then, bye for now.